The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are those of the individual guests. If you're a sensitive snowflake that may get easily offended, then turn this off immediately. If you want to hear the real truth about the gun culture, then stick around. This is the Armed Citizen Podcast. What is going on, my Go Squad? Welcome to the Armed Citizen Podcast. Today is Tuesday, June 2nd, 2020. It is Happy Every Second Matters, so Happy Every Second Matters. And if you're not familiar with that, it is once a month, on the second of every month, we talk and we try to, express our love and affection for the Second Amendment. So it just happens to be the show falls on the second of the month. So Happy Every Second Matters, everybody. And we are live, as always, on YouTube. If you guys are watching in replay or listening in podcast form, hello, welcome to the channel. Hope we don't make you any dumber than you already are. If you're watching live in the side chat, please say hello and let us know that you're out there. We can't see you unless you're out there throughout the chat. If you want to ask a question, make sure you tag one of us on the panel, because if it keeps going, I'm not going to be able to see it. So tag one of us and we'll make sure you get it. You can also text or call questions in to our hotline at 530-364-4678. That is brought to you by Rod and Shelly Gates over at the Gun Cleaners. So really happy to have them on board. They're good friends of ours, and I use their products, and I've met them in real life. They're not robots, so they're good people helping out the podcast. So we got a really cool guest tonight. If you guys are probably familiar with him, he's got a pretty big following out there on YouTube and on Instagram and all that. It's Fieldcraft. Survival, and he's also got his own podcasts and different projects with training and everything. But from Arizona, we got Mike Glover. What's going on, Mike?
How are you? Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, man. I know you've been busy, and just like you said, you just got back from another training session. So thanks for being able to kind of spend some time. We know we've got a lot of people out there that are going to be wanting to talk to you a little bit. Appreciate you joining us.
Always, man. It's my pleasure, especially anything covering the Second Amendment and preparedness as a whole. I'm all in, man.
Right on. And kind of the quasi co-host, producer, jack of no trades whatsoever from the great state of Texas, the tactical virus. Leprechaun himself. What's up, Clover? How you doing, man?
Hey, man. Good to be here. And looking forward to getting to know Mike a little bit.
Yeah, I think everybody out here is probably familiar with Mike and backstories. Former Green Beret, Sergeant Major, if I'm not mistaken, did some government contracting work and is now in the land of survival and training and all of that. Mike, if you want to kind of go through your background for a few minutes before we kind of kick this off, we'd love to maybe give some people your background and all that.
Yeah, no problem. I spent 4 years in the infantry, and then pre 9/11, pre Global War on Terror, leading up to September 11th. Decided I want to become a Green Beret and spent the rest of my time as a Green Beret in special operations all the way up until about 2016. Spent a few years contracting with the CIA as a contractor, deploying overseas, and did almost everything you could do in special operations. Was a sniper, was a JTAC, was a team leader, a team sergeant, a whole bunch of stuff. A sergeant major at the end of my career for Special Operations Detachment Africa. And so decided one day I wanted to start a company focused on survival as a genre. So started my company, Fieldcraft Survival.
Yeah. And, I love all the stuff. I really kind of learned about you through a podcast. And I was like, oh, man, this guy is right on. And then I started watching some of the videos. And by no means am I a survivalist at all. I went through SEER, but that was 25 years ago and probably forgot all of it by now. But for those out there, and we're going to kind of jump into real quick, is the survivalist side of things, especially with the way things are going on right now with COVID and all of everything else that's going on right now. Stocking up and learning how to survive on your own is going to be maybe very important. So for those that are kind of new to survival, what are some of the essentials if someone's like, hey, I want to get a go bag, or I want to maybe stock up the house on certain items? What are the essentials that you think that everyone should have at their disposal?
Yeah, if you think about survival as a genre, it's massive, right? There's so many important categories underneath the umbrella of survival. when I think about survival and its context, I think about my experiences in special operations and the things that made me more prepared to survive kind of worst case scenarios, a raid against Al Qaeda. And the fact that we came back routinely from those missions successful lent itself to a whole bunch of ideology and concepts and processes that we teach at Fieldcraft. First and foremost, it's equipment, right? Equipment is the facilitator of survival. So you have to have the right equipment. You have to have the right mindset, because mindset plays into the willingness and resilience to survive. And you also have to have the training. You have to be able to train on the tactics, techniques, and procedures and equipment to make yourself better off. Like if you, at a start point, I make people understand that they can look at themselves. You are your own first response, so you are responsible for your own preparedness. And that starts with the right mindset and the right equipment. Everyday carry, if you're a citizen of the United States, as long as your state allows it, and maybe even if it doesn't, you should be carrying concealed or carrying some type of firearm to defend your life. Because the last thing you want to happen is a circumstance where you wish you had your gun. You might not be able to come back from that. So having an everyday carry pistol, I prefer a Glock 19 if somebody was going to ask me off the streets. Inside the waistband or some kind of concealment, I use a Patagonia fly fishing bag for a lot of my stuff because I like the capacity of it. And a tourniquet, more often, more likely, and it's just statistically a probability, you're going to run into an accident before you run into a gunfight. So having the ability to treat your own trauma or treat somebody else's trauma in your family or friends or stranger is important. So a tourniquet and a pistol are a start point. And then being trained on those individual pieces of equipment. I mean, we can go down a rabbit hole if you want. But
yeah. Interesting. I have discussions all the time about tourniquets, and I carry a rat tourniquet, just a simple, a simple, small, rapid deploy tourniquet that can get the stuff done. And a lot of people I talk to, and I do a lot of training as well, still to this day. But people say, well, if you carry a tourniquet on your person, is that for you, for someone else? And I feel kind of selfish sometimes saying, ideally, it's for me. I want someone that has to come up and it's got there. Now, if someone else needs it, obviously it's there for whoever needs it. But ideally, it's if someone comes up and I have an injury, I have it right there that they can stop the bleed on myself. But do you carry multiple tourniquets, or do you just carry kind of one on a day-to-day basis to where it can be for anybody?
Yeah, that's a good question. And that's really, that's realistic, right? I mean, we learned in the military that it's your first aid is your self aid, right? Because you have been on your own individual training and being responsible for your own protection as well as your own aid. And then it was buddy aid, right? Your buddy. And then it was corpsman aid or medical aid from somebody who's a professional. At this point in the world in which we live, it's very easy to get that training that we weren't privy to 10 years ago. 10 years ago, we were using cravats and sticks as tourniquets, but now we have rapid application, Cat 7, soft T. And so it's very easy to learn how to use a tourniquet in a small period of time. And I would say, the way I look at it is based off capacity. If I was to wear a jeans and a flannel shirt, which I'm wearing right now, and carry a tourniquet, it would be uncomfortable. I'm not going to stuff a tourniquet in my pants, especially a Cat 7, that's relatively large, because I just wouldn't do it because it's not convenient. Now, if I take my Patagonia fly fishing bag or a purse, a European man satchel, you have more capacity, so you can stuff more capability. And so when I'm traveling with my family, for example, I have multiple redundant systems. I have a tourniquet in my visor panel, which we make at Fieldcraft Survival, one on my mobility panel on the back of my seat, which we make at Fieldcraft Survival, and then I have an aid bag in the back. I like that redundancy because, again, if I'm going to get injured, I'm more likely to have more than one extremity injured. It's not going to be just one, it's going to be multiple. And so I want to treat myself in that trauma, but I have the redundancy to be able to treat multiple people. I mean, it's based off of what you can carry. And if you can carry more, why not carry more? Especially if you're, we look at vehicles as the extension of a rucksack. If you have a Honda Civic, it doesn't have to be a off-road 4-wheel drive vehicle. You have a trunk space. So put that equipment where it's needed. So when you need it, it's there.
Let's see here. So Guitar Pete out there says, Patagonia flat fishing bag. Is that the one that you're talking about? I guess he's looking it up. Is it over on your website?
No, so we don't. This is crazy because I used that in GRS when I was a CIA contractor. I used a Patagonia fly fishing bag, and they make multiple versions. The one I recommend is the 8-liter Stealth Atom, which is ATOM fly fishing bag, and they have variations of that bag that are a little bit more simple to all the way to complex. The cool thing about these bags, in fact, let me grab it real quick. The cool thing about these bags is it's a fly fishing bag, but when you wear it, you're not giving away anything because you're wearing it slung. But when you put it in front of you, because it's made for fly fishing, you have ready access like a chest rig to everything you need. When I was in GRS, I had the Stealth Atom version, which this isn't the Stealth Atom version. It's the Stealth, or this is the Atom version, which is a little bit smaller. But I fit 7 full M4 mags, 4 Glock mags, my GPS, my blood shits for CHIT for survival and evasion, and a whole bunch of stuff in this one bag. Everybody's like, "What the fuck? What did he just say?"
So that's basically like your old. We used to call H-Hunter, the old harnesses that we carried all of our mags and all. It's basically the civilian version of a med kit / harness / whatever you need it to be.
Yeah, this is the civilian chest rig, and
There you go.
Is it reduces your signature in public because you're not the guy who's wearing a 3-day assault pack made of Molly that's multicam that looks like you're about to go to Afghanistan. Yeah. And so, rolling with this in everyday life, in my lifestyle, which is outdoorsy, it's not going to throw anybody off. And I have all the capability I need. Now, I will tell you that Fieldcraft Survival, because this is a fly fishing bag, we are making our own bag that will be out in about 60 to 90 days just for everyday carry, med, trauma, EDC, the list goes on.
Yeah. Now, there's a bunch of people out there saying thank you for your service and all that. You were talking earlier, before I move on, I want to say, Clover, do you have anything you want to bring up or out there in the chat real quick before we move on?
Yeah, I'm curious, going back into the background a little bit, prior to your time in the service, at that point, when you were younger, a kid, whatever, were you spending a lot of times in the outdoors and doing outdoorsy things that sort of kind of led you into the whole survival prepping thing?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, my lifestyle, my father was in the military. He was a field artilleryman and a military police officer. And I grew up kind of in that circumstance. I was born at Fort Ord, California. I was raised a little bit in Germany. And then he went to work in the Department of Corrections. And I was always outdoors, an avid fisherman. I probably fished 4 to 5 times a week with my dad. I mean, the dude was OCD about it. I mean, we went out, pier, freshwater, anything we could throw a pole in, we were fishing. And so I grew up in that environment and then joined the military very young at 17. So it's kind of all I knew in the survival realm. But like many people, I've been to SEER school. I've been to like 6 SEER schools with the Army, a couple SEER schools with the CIA. And I will tell you that even going to the training, I don't think training makes you an expert. I don't think it makes you the subject matter expert. It makes you more aware. But I think you have to live the lifestyle to be able, which I wasn't an expert in survival, but now that I live it as part of my purpose in my company with all the men that work for me, we live that lifestyle. And I think you need a true SME that lives it in order to be the person who's going to teach it.
No doubt. I went through SEER in the spring of '95 over in Japan, and we kind of focused more on the survival and the evading, not necessarily the resist and escape, but more the survival. And I don't know if that's what you guys did, but we had a detachment of Rangers go through it with us and some French idiots. But anyways, when you're talking about the military SEER, just briefly, because it's interesting, but when you went through military SEER versus CIA SEER, is it different? I mean, are they teaching different tactics or different things, or is it relatively similar?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So the military side of SEER, which I went through SEER C, which is high risk SEER, which is for aviators and special operations guys.
Right.
That SEER is based on Colonel Nick Rowe's experiences in Vietnam. Colonel Nick Rowe was one of 17 people in the entire Vietnam War to escape as a prisoner of war, meaning a lot of people died in POW camps in Vietnam. It wasn't, they had a higher rate of return in World War II because of the Geneva Convention and following guidelines than they did in Vietnam, where the Viet Cong didn't care as guerrilla fighters are conditioned. Yep. And so it was based on the idea that you're going to be in a wartime environment. You had to evade, and then you had to resist and escape, meaning you had to come back with dignity. The difference between that and the CIA side of SEER is the CIA, which is a government agency, focuses on austere environments and being in semi-permissive countries that go awry or go stray. So I'm in Yemen, and I'm working in Yemen as a case officer, as a State Department official, as a government contractor, and things go wrong. Well, in that semi-permissive environment where things go pretty much non-permissive, I have to be prepared to flex. So I might be looking at infrastructure as opposed to hitting the wood line. I might be looking at acquiring vehicles. I might be looking at commandeering or maybe even building a network of people that can get me out of that circumstance. So it's a lot different. We call one version of it peacetime detention, which covers detention in foreign countries, but also all the things that I just covered of being in a semi-permissive environment, as opposed to the non-permissive wartime environment.
Yeah, there's a question out there from Midnight Range TM. He said, I'll put it up here. It says, do they teach different skills for different parts of the world specifically, or is that training generic to cover all climates? I can tell you that the SEER training that I went through was more cold weather, mountainous forest, because it was in Japan. I'm assuming that it's going to be different. The skills are the same from my experience. I took what I learned. I actually went to SEER after I was in Somalia, so I didn't have that training before I went to Somalia. So I can't tell you what it was for desert training or African SEER would be, but you can probably go through that as when it comes to desert warfare versus urban warfare versus jungle warfare, you probably had it all. Is it relatively similar as far as the skill sets?
It is. It's relatively similar. There's core competencies that we teach in special operations or the military, where we focus on establishing a base of knowledge. And CRC is that, right? It's the base of knowledge. Now, I went through in wintertime, so it sucked because it was colder. When I was getting, hosed down in a cage naked, that's a different aspect, right? It's a different kind of metric. But we do have schools like jungle warfare, right? That have to do with triple canopy, high humidity, all the considerations that you would experience, including mosquitoes, survival, etc. And then we
different things to eat in different climates, different. Exactly. Yeah.
The environmental factors are the biggest contingency factors that you focus on in survival in the first place. So they vary many. Like Ranger School, for example, is a great example of the diversity of a school that's not necessarily survival. I mean, I went to Ranger School when I was 18 years old, and I didn't know what I was getting into, but being 3 phases in 3 different geographical locations, you get some of the mountains, so it's going to be colder. There's different considerations. I was in the swamps of Florida, and the same thing. So it varies. Now, survival as a core competency is just one school, but we do have multiple types of schools to go to.
Absolutely. Calaveras 32 Special out there. He's a brother from behind enemy lines. He's out in California trying to, fight the good fight out there. But he wants to know, how about a handheld CB or ham? And I know that you were on, or you had our good friend Josh. We know him as Hosh Nasi. Hosh was on, I don't know, he came out to you or you went out to him, but Hosh is huge into the ham radio and all that stuff. So when it comes to the CBs or ham, how important is that for survival right now?
Yeah, I do recommend that, Ham Radio Crash Course, which is his YouTube and all of his content, that you do reference the SME, the subject matter expert. I'm not a subject matter expert on comms, but I leverage guys like that to make myself an expert, but also make other people tuned in to what experts are recommending. Josh recommends that you get a handheld version of it. Bofang, Dasu. There's a couple competitors that make similar competent ham radios, but what you have to understand is ham radio is based on a frequency set where you do have to get ham radio certified to be able to be talking or communicating on a ham radio. But ham radios are good for listening as well. In fact, in the survival context, I think that's the most important aspect. When you want to get situational awareness in a place where the infrastructure doesn't exist, well, because ham radios run on batteries and because relay stations run on solar, you're still going to hear the traffic in either a natural or man-made disaster from FEMA, from experts, maybe even from ham radio operators who are communicating to still retain situational awareness. And I think you should have that, which is a direct line to tap into that. But also you should have direct line of communications, line of sight communications via VHF and UHS, which is, the CB that you pick up at Bass Pro that allows you to talk intercoms, because those intercommunications are just as important.
Yeah, I think when people think of ham radios, they think of that shit hits the fan or that Red Dawn scenario. What they don't realize is if there's a natural disaster, tornadoes, hurricanes, some of these cell towers could be down. There might be the only way to communicate from the outside world, get help here, or, hey, I hear there's help coming. I mean, there's all sorts of stuff that those radios, handheld radios, can play a dramatic role in natural disasters, not just that Red Dawn scenario as well. Clover, do you have anything you want to bring up before we move on?
I think I'm good.
Okay. Earlier, you touched on concealed carry, and that's one of the big missions that I have. I'm a huge concealed carry proponent. Want to get people out there trained and carried as much as they can. And we've had this discussion on many other podcasts that I've done and then people on this podcast. But what I love also is you have the podcast, the Mindset Podcast, and the mindset of being that everyday warrior and taking that mental decision and saying, I'm going to carry, because it's not just going down to the gun shop and buying a gun and say, I'm going to carry, I'm part of the solution now. There are people that I probably don't want to carry because they don't have that mental mindset of saying, yeah, anyone can carry a gun, but what if you're actually put in that situation and you've got to take that shot? Are you mentally able and prepared to take that shot? So when you're training, especially maybe newer gun owners or newer carry people, can you pick the ones out relatively quickly that you say they may not be mentally ready for this, or how does that process go?
Yeah. Look, when I look at one mindset is one of the most popular hashtags on social media. But if you ask anybody what mindset means, nobody can articulate tangibly what it means to have a more refined or better mindset. Like, what's the process to get to a bad mindset, and what does that look like? And how do I get to a better mindset? Well, when I look at mindset and survival, it's resilience. It's your ability to cope, pick yourself up and fight through adversity, etc. But when I look at everyday carry considerations, we teach that mindset through processes. Like the best question I could ask at a course is, I asked somebody recently, we ran an EDC everyday carry course this weekend, and I said, listen, what is your criteria in your head for you to literally pull your gun out and fight for your life? And then I gave him a scenario. I said, you're pumping gas at a gas station and a guy comes up to you and he shows you the back frame or handle of his firearm, and you see it, but he's not combative. He's just saying, hey man, I don't want to do this, but if you keep coming at me, maybe I'll use this. And then the guy that I questioned said, I would probably draw my pistol. I said, okay, well, what would you do? He said, well, I probably wouldn't shoot him because I would give him a chance. And so I said, you do realize, one, there's a not a tactic. It's actually a natural primitive thing we do naturally called a behavioral script, where we script out all the things we do in life based on the models around us. So when you tie your shoes, you don't think about tying your shoes because it's scripted. It's something that some people refer to muscle memory. You have that script. So if you build a script in which you're accelerating or becoming more efficient through movement, and you go to draw your pistol and then you stop that script, cognitively stop that script under stress and say, I'm not going to shoot this guy because he's not an immediate threat. Maybe he's an imminence of threat, or he's about to be, but I'm going to give it an opportunity, you're interrupting the script that leads to you putting down a bad guy. So one thing I articulate is you're not a police officer. You don't have the luxury nor the legal stance to draw guns on people to give them opportunities to mitigate risk. Two, if you drew a pistol on somebody without the intention of using deadly force because your deadly force criteria hasn't been met, then what you just did is presented a deadly force to that person. So let's say we're in Arizona. Well, in Arizona, it's an open carry state. He could have the handle gun of that gun showing anytime he wanted. He could have it on the outside of his waistband. But you pull the gun. Now he pulls his gun and he shoots and harms you. Let's say miraculously you survived. You might be going to prison for attempted murder because he's defending his life. And now his perception is you just drew a gun and held it on me and I'm protecting mine by using deadly force. So what I tell people is you have to know what the criteria is for you to defend your life and the lives around you. And once that criteria is met, you don't pull guns to show or mitigate risk. You pull guns to defend life. And so I'm not pulling that gun unless I'm willing to go through my behavioral script and meet it to its end goal or objective, which is eliminating and destroying the threat. And so a lot of people haven't asked themselves that question. Just doing that mental modeling and that war gaming and just simply asking each other those questions is how we are going to develop the right mindset and be more responsible concealed carry owners.
Absolutely. It's an interesting question that could go down about 17,000 different rabbit holes, but I think it's a valid question. And it's something I wanted to touch, maybe we can touch right now, but with all the bullshit that's going on right now, Guitar Man Pete says, should we be preparing for something bad in the U.S.? And, if kind of get your thoughts on what you think in the last 4 days, all the bullshit that's going on and what you think about where we are as a country. I would like to say that I think that there are issues out there, obviously, but what I'm most disappointed in, I'll get your opinion on this as well, is there doesn't seem to be any leadership in our country right now, either from anywhere, governments, from social groups, from anyone. There's no one leading right now. I think everyone's afraid to upset someone, and that's upsetting in itself because there's got to be someone that stands up and says, look, I understand this or that, but we need to do this and you do that. At least there's someone out there saying, but we don't seem to have one like that. So I want to kind of get your opinion on what's going on with America right now and answer the question, do we need to be prepared for something bad happening in the next, incoming future in the U.S.?
Yeah. So the circumstance with George Floyd being killed, May 25th is when he died. And it is a tragedy that human life in any circumstance is lost, especially in America. So we should be looking at that circumstance, asking ourselves, inherently, what is the problem? Well, it's not a black-white problem to me, right? It's easy to realize a problem that we see and turn it into a race issue. One, it makes it easy because we don't have to address the actual issue when we generalize. Like if I say all Black Lives Matter, and I'm generalizing, because then I'm not saying specifically what I mean, right? So hashtags, clickbait, the propaganda, the headlines, that's how we operate intellectually as a country. And that inherently is the problem, because maybe it's a policing and culture issue. Like I train law enforcement for a living. So It's not like I don't think that we could improve. But do I think systemically that racism is a problem in our nation? No. Inherently, as ancestrally, we are segregationist. Maybe that lends itself to racism in small circles. Maybe we do have racism in small spurts. That is the things that we have dealt with in our culture through our history. But the point at which we now, having had 8 years of Barack Obama, where Joe Biden is saying that, people are creating these cultures and we have a systemic race issues. Well, you had 8 years to figure it out. And what did you do with that 8 years? Right. Well, maybe it's because you don't think that we have a systemic race issue and you just want to generalize everything so you can get the vote that you want on your team, right? That's inherently one of the biggest issues, right? It's media, propaganda machines, influencing younger generations, because most of these people are young, and getting them on their team. The problem is it takes a comprehensive discussion and great leadership in order to fix what we think is broken. Now, as a strategist, as somebody who planned some of the biggest counterterrorism operations in history in the global war on terror, I look at this and I go, man, what's the start point? Well, there would have to be a problem in order to meet an objective or end state. The problem in this context is there is no problem because systemic racism does not exist in our country, right? There aren't white cops grossly negligently murdering black men. But if you watch the news and you listen to celebrities and people who, to be honest, don't matter in our society, then you would think that. But the people with the most influence are spitting the most propaganda. When we need the people with the most influence rationally discussing comprehensively the long form discussion. I in fact, tomorrow, which, I have a small segment of popularity, hopefully am going to influence the masses with strategic ideology and lining out what we need to focus on as moving forward. Because if the end state is violence, if the end state is burning our country to the ground, well, then you're on the wrong side of history and you're going to lose, right? To getting back to preparation, we should always be prepared for the worst case scenario. Maybe this in the context of scenarios could end up being the worst case, but I plan for the worst case the same. So no matter how you look at me or how we advocate for preparedness, it could be the Russians jumping in like Red Dawn. I'm going to be prepared. So that's firearms, that's ammunition, which entails security protocols. That's med, that's food sustainment, that's pharmaceuticals, that's understanding long-term survival, period. I'm going to be prepared for that. We advocate for that. We let people know that, yes, we should always be prepared. And then if this is maybe the 3/4 of the way worst case scenario, everything between best and worst will be prepared for. Look, I wouldn't encourage anybody ever to pick up a firearm and go out advocating for violence. But if violence comes to me in my law-abiding life, you better believe I will meet it by shooting it in the face. You throw a brick through my window, that's a different subset. You throw it at my head or my family, I'm going to put a bullet in you. And that's not a threat. That is a promise, because I have the inherent right to self-defense in this country. As a law-abiding citizen who owns a firearm and follows the laws, that is my inherent right. And so anybody who's listening to this who is law-abiding, you are justified to defend your life at all times, under every circumstance. And so take that with not a grain of salt, take that with wholeheartedly and make that your lifestyle and your culture.
Absolutely. Guns and Barbecue out there says, Ghost, did I really hear you say that you don't want people carry simply because they might freeze? Isn't that on them? No, I don't think so. I think it is on them, because the reason why I don't want people who doesn't have that mental capacity to be that warrior. If you're going to carry, you're not just defending yourself. You're saying, I'm going to defend myself, my family, and any other innocent bystanders that I might be around that might be in imminent danger. And if you're not willing to take that shot, you're not willing to do that, then you're going to put yourself and those other people in more harm's way by not taking that shot than if you take that shot. And if people that aren't mentally prepared to do that, and I hear people saying, well, I shot a deer, I shot this. It ain't the same, man. I promise you. And if you're not ready to do that, then until you are ready, continue to train, continue to go get instruction, continue to go to the range, be more proficient with your firearm. But until you make that mental decision that I'm ready to take that shot and to protect, be that first line of defense, because guess what? The average cop is 7 minutes away. This shit's over with in 30 seconds. 30 seconds. You've got to be willing to take that shot when the opportunity arises, or everyone else gets hurt. I don't want you carrying. And it's nothing bad against you. I'm just saying that if you're not ready, then you're not ready, and it's okay. So, I mean, that's answering the question. I'm sorry for kind of going on a rant there, but I take that very seriously. I take concealed carry very seriously, because you are the first one. You are the first responder, whether it's a medical. And I tell people, if you're not ready to take that shot, but you want to do something, then you know what? Go take a Stop the Bleed course. Go take a first aid CPR class. You can still be part of that solution to help someone, even though you might not be ready to take that shot. If someone is ready to take a shot, you might be that first paramedic or that first responder to save a life. There are a lot of things you can do besides carrying a gun to help that scenario. So Clover, do you have anything else real quick?
Yeah, I mean, all that topic, I mean, I want to come at it from a different angle. And because you mentioned what it is, whether they're deer hunting or whatever. And I mean, there's no telling how many animals I've taken over my lifetime. And with every one, there is a bit of a mental issue there. And there is a bit of hesitation there, even with animals, even with nuisance animals and pests. It's just there. I mean, you're still taking a life, whether you're taking that and you're going to put it in the freezer, or you're taking that because it's messing with your livestock, or whatever the case is, there is a levity to that. And, there's people out there that do not hunt, and that's why, because they can't handle the fact that they're doing that. But then they'll turn around, to your point, they'll turn around and they'll carry. They'll get their license and they'll carry. And it's like, well, you don't hunt because you can't take the life of a deer, but you think that when the time comes, you're going to be able to draw down and pull the trigger on another human being. And
Exactly.
So it's one of them things to where, you're absolutely 100% right. I mean, it's a mental game, and that's just as much a part of your training and practice and everything else as is the physical acts out on a range.
Yeah, I don't hunt because I have no desire to go sit in a stream at 0 dark 30 anymore. I don't want to do that. I have no desire. I'll go to duck club or the deer camp and I'll hang out, but getting up at 0 dark 30 anymore to go stand in some water to shoot a bird, it just doesn't excite me. That's the only reason, but it is what it is. JMA is a fellow Marine out there, says, as a black man who served the country, I'm so tired of the black and white thing. It's as a people thing, and we as people need to fix this problem. Kind of going on what you were saying, Mike, is, one of the things that I loved a few days ago is it actually got taken down off Instagram, but you had a live thing that you did on Instagram that was talking about the double standard in America. And I thought that was a wonderful way of looking at things. You don't really think about outside the box, and they think black, white, they think us versus them, but they don't understand the double standard that there is in America. Do you want to kind of go in and briefly talk about that? Because I know it was only up for a little bit because I guess Instagram took it down or something.
Yeah. I hate the generalization of anything because I know what it leads to. I look at, I've been all over the world. I've been to Libya, Yemen, Pakistan, Iraq, Afghanistan, Africa, like all over these problematic societies and cultures and ideology where you had people that have generalized everything. And when you generalize any problem set, you don't come up with real solutions. So if the overall objective is just to spin wheels because you have an outlet for emotional outcry, then yeah, that's one thing. But if you want to really address a problem, especially in society, you have to comprehensively look at specific things that you identify as problems. So when I say even Black Lives Matter, when people don't understand the context or even the origins of how Black Lives Matter started, then they don't have an understanding holistically of why it's a problem to me. I mean, Black Lives Matter started off of multiple specific shootings, which 2 out of the 3 actually came back that it was the fault of the person, the suspect at the time, who happened to be African American. But my thing is the double standard is, this last fiscal week in one city, in one neighborhood in Chicago, 17 Black men were murdered. There was an 11-year-old child that was murdered, African American child that was murdered by another drug dealer because he wanted to get back at the guy and the family that caused him the issues. There was an African American male that was murdered, a federal police officer that was murdered in Oakland by a protester who turned violent, who murdered him.
Shot him right in the head, didn't he?
Yeah, he did.
Yeah.
And then I just got a text from my buddy in Las Vegas. One of their police officers last night was shot in the head. The head. And so where do we draw the line when we generalize so much that it grossly affects not only our society, but the way the world perceives our society? I mean, there's Black Lives Matter protests in Nova Scotia today, in Germany today. And they think that systemically white cops and white people across the United States are burning Black people to the ground, when that's not the case. The chief of police in Minneapolis, Minnesota is Black.
Right.
And so they have a large number of African American police officers. So when you generalize a race, and this is the ultimate problem to me, what does white even mean? Look, I'm half Korean, and I'm proud of my Asian culture, but I'm also white skinned. So do I fall in the category?
My daughters have Japanese. My wife's Japanese. She's the same way. You know, she doesn't know. Sometimes, am I Asian? Do I click white? You know, what do I pick? You know,
so large percentage of the white population that live in poverty. So are they privileged because they grew up? I grew up in a mobile home in Florida, in a trailer park. So am I privileged? The only reason I was able to make a living in my life was because of the U.S. government and the military, and the Army gave me an opportunity. And so when I look at people and they like to generalize everything, I read that as a sign of unintelligence. You know what I mean? Like it's the lack of intelligence. It's not there. And I also look at it as the lack of understanding. Because if you would actually ask these people who are protesting, why are you protesting and what do you know about it? They don't even know the root of why they're protesting. And so the worst thing I see, and I'm speaking as a neutral person here who is not on the side of white or black. Like I grew up in a black town. Most of my friends, my best friends were black. I have family members that are black. So when I look at white people saying things like, it's our fault, it's the white guilt, we did this, no white person in America is responsible for your ancestors' flaws.
Right.
Africans in Africa sell slaves today. I've been to Africa multiple times. I spent years in Africa. And I've seen Africans sell Africans to other people, including Arabs in Africa, including to Chinese in Africa as slaves. And yet we think that we're living in a slave-driven society of white people abusing and enslaving African Americans. That's not the case. If you really want to make a difference, let's focus on the issues.
Right.
Fake cultures and institutions that push propaganda, miscued and misguided people who are using false pretenses.
On both sides.
African Americans are killing African Americans in their own inner cities every single day. Let's look at that, because that's what I care about. Because I think every American life matters, and
there you go.
I'm opportunist in that sense. I don't care what color of your skin is. In fact, when I saw that video, I didn't see a white cop killing a black person. I saw an institution with bad policies and a bad human being killing a person who was fighting for their life. And in any context, in any measure, in any society, that's wrong. So let's address that first and foremost, and it will just cover down on everything else.
Love it. Julia out there wants to know, first of all, have you seen the viral video of the Seattle riot weapon snatcher? If you have, how would you approach that situation?
Yeah, I have. I actually have communicated with that guy.
Really?
Yeah, he's a former Marine. He's an 0300, former combat arms guy in the military. And, look, that situation was dangerous, right?
Yeah.
One, it was dangerous for the guy who was a protester. Wasn't just a protester. Let's clearly delineate the difference between somebody who protests as a right, a First Amendment right, to say what they mean and demonstrate what they intend to mean, versus a violent offender, criminal, thug, name the synonym. This guy had just broken into a vehicle and stolen a M4 and was holding it. At the time, I think he was taking a picture or just showboating with a live weapon, who probably had no idea how to use that weapon and was on the verge, especially after people incite violence, which is like a mob mentality, which drives violence and perpetuates it, could have committed an act of violence. And this guy comes out of nowhere and he snatches the weapon. Good for him. Now, I would never advocate for armed citizens to go into the middle of these type of circumstances and do what they did. But the bottom line is, who's going to do it? If the government and the local populations are telling their men and women in law enforcement that are supposed to serve and to protect to stand down. When, I hear all this talk about these people being defenders of people and the sheepdog between good and evil. Where the hell are you guys at? Right? I'll tell you where I'm at. every one of my guys are on QRF or on standby. There's a Black Lives Matter protest in my small town of Prescott, Arizona, of 60,000 people. And that scares the hell out of the law-abiding citizens of this community. And if shit hits the fan, you know where I'll be? I will be with my men, with the law enforcement officers, and having their back. I've coordinated with mayors. I've coordinated with chiefs of police, with sheriffs, and we will do whatever it takes necessary to ensure their safety and the safety of our law-abiding. And I wouldn't advocate for anybody to do that, but I advocate for you to protect your own communities by any means necessary.
I love it. I love it. Kind of switching gears back to a concealed carry. For new concealed carriers, carrying without one in the chamber, do you believe it's okay at first until a person becomes more confident and then chambered, or don't carry unless you're chambering one? What do you think about Israeli carry?
Yeah, I think it's a bad practice. I think it's a bad protocol. And I think you have to understand that what happens to you under stress, where you have this hypothalamus that activates, overdrives your sympathetic nervous system, which causes you to do things you typically wouldn't do to optimize your performance in survival, right? Flowing blood to the large muscles in your body to be able to fight, flight, or potentially freeze. Those things are not beneficial to cognitive processes. So in a flinch response, you have to have a tactic to implement. My flinch response is driving my behavioral script to my pistol and operating. Well, if you enact a mechanism where you have to do something that is more detailed or cognitive, which requires more cognitive consciousness, you are going to fail, right? So you need to realize that pistols that exist today, number one, are the fastest operating pistols, are single action only pistols like Glocks. When you have that pistol, when you draw it, there are other ways to mitigate the anxiousness or lack of training. A holster with retention protects the trigger mechanism by shrouding the trigger guard. The gun's not going to magically go off in your purse, in your hands, in your waistband. You have to pull the trigger in order for that to happen. So I recommend, one, you never consider Israeli carrying unless there's unforeseen circumstances. I have been in those circumstances where I had to put a pistol without a shroud or without any means of protecting it in my waistband through my jeans to be able to protect myself. But I wasn't going to stick that live gun in my waistband and risk negligently discharging into my crotch. So I had to do that. That's an unforeseen and very rare circumstance. Outside of that, I would never consider it. I would get the appropriate training and appropriate equipment prior to ever considering that.
Yeah. Now, let me ask you this. I'm assuming that even though you very rarely, if ever, do it, except for certain situations, you've probably practiced and trained to draw, rack the slide, and engage. And you've probably practiced that just in case you had to. That's another thing, is if you're going to do it, I'm not going to sit there and say that you should carry one out of the chamber. But if you are, make sure when you're at the range, work on your draw, get that extra half second to rack. So that's part of your drills that you're doing, so that you're just accustomed to do it. If you're going to do it, that's on you. But make sure you're proficient with that extra movement, because if you never practice racking that slide, once again, you're giving that extra half second to someone that, is not good. Clover, what about you? You got anything going up real quick?
No, we're good.
Okay. There was a question that I wanted to bring up. I saw a second ago. Goodness gracious. Oh, I just say it's a statement. I want to say hello to Screaming Skull Saloon. He said, take care, stay frosty out there. Wish me luck. He's working security in St. Paul, Minnesota. Stay safe out there. I know that here in Arkansas, there have been some protests and riots in Little Rock, and my daughter lives in Little Rock and worried about her safety. If you're out there, there's one of two ways to do this. You can either stay home, bunker in, protect yourself and your family, and that's as important, or the other side is, if you want to get involved in those, whether you do that or not, it makes no difference. Just stay safe and try to make that situation as safe for everyone as possible. The First Amendment does allow us to peacefully assemble and to speak our minds and express who we are. But like Mike was saying, let's just try to make this something that you're never going to get your point across if it turns violent. if you can keep a level head and make it a peaceful protest, you're probably going to get listened to. But the second that you turn violence, they don't remember a thing you say. It's all about that action. So be safe out there. Looks like we've got so Guns and Barbecue wants to know am I saying that if I don't carry one in the chamber, then don't carry it all? I'm saying I don't recommend it. But if you are, that's your choice, bro. That's your choice. If you're going to carry without one because you feel safe, then that's on you. All I'm saying is if you're going to do that, incorporate that into your practice. That draw, rack, present. That's got to be part of your training and your practice on every single day. You can sit there and just do that dry firing while you're watching Seinfeld at night. Draw, rack, present. Draw, rack, present. At least so you've got that extra movement that most of us don't have. You're going to have that extra movement. I'm not saying that don't. I'm saying I don't recommend it either. But if you are, make sure you're proficient with that draw. That's all I'm saying, bro. I guess I'm pissing off Guns and Barbecue tonight on my concealed carry thoughts, so it's all good. Let's see here. Red Dot. This is from Sean White. Red Dot. LPVO for 300 yards in. What do you prefer? Or do you prefer hollow, or what would you prefer for 300 and in?
So there's a few considerations here. When you're looking at any firearm and extended ranges, you have to consider the ability to positively identify a target, and you have to consider what's called, we refer to generally as holdovers or hold-offs. You could do with most M4s, which have a maximum effective range about 550 meters. Most weapon systems you could identify, or you could address a threat at 300 yards all day long without gross changes in elevation, right? If you zero a 14.5 inch barrel with 55 grain even at a 1 in 7 or 1 in 9 twist, that's going to give you a 25 meter / 300 repeat zero with minimal holdovers in between. Where you see the gross holdover requirements is the bullet drop at 300 and beyond. The bullet drop at 400 yards, for example, was around 60 inches. So if you think about a red dot and you engage a target with a red dot at 400 yards, one, you can't see and identify it. Two, you would have to hold over 60 inches, which is another person above that as a reference in space and time. You can't address that with a mill reticle or staged line, which is important. Another consideration, obviously, is that the PID aspect. If I'm shooting something at 300, I want to see that. And I recommend that you have some variable magnification in that optic. It could be a 1. You could probably get away at 300 yards with a 1:3 or a 1:4. Mm-hmm. But if you're going to put a 1:4, then why not put a 1:6 or 1:8? I have multiple guns for multiple reasons. If I'm shooting out to 300 yards, more than likely it's because I'm hunting. So I want to be able to PID, but I also want to consider the shots beyond 300 yards, because if I'm shooting at 300, I might as well be prepared to shoot at 500. So I'm using a minimum variable optic of 21 power, which is common. And then I have the stage reticle line, so which I use mil radians. Mm-hmm. And I also use a Kestrel, applied ballistics called Kestrel, to be able to get my data or dope or right reference near me so I could be able to shoot that target that far. So the answer is there's many variables, but I recommend variable magnification and a stage reticle at beyond 300 yards.
Right. Now, this could go down 27 different rabbit holes again. Let's just say you're setting up truck gun, home defense, a battle rifle for 300 yards and in or whatever. I use a 36 yard zero. Now, I used to use a 5200 for a long, long time. But the 36 I like because I can kind of get from 7 yards to 300 yards. I'm looking at a 6 inch or so. I like that. But would you recommend, or is there a zero recommendation for someone that wants to be able to go 300 yards and in? Is it the 100 yard? Is it the 25? I mean, what do you recommend? Or is there a way to say this is the one?
Remember, there's 3 distinguishable factors when determining what your zero is going to be in the first place. It's barrel length, barrel twist, and bullet weight. So when you optimize and understand those three relationships, it's going to determine what the best zero practice is going to be. Generally speaking, a 5200, a 25-300, even a 36 is going to set you up for everything in between, because the overall objective in all three of those zeros is to minimize my hold over or deviation based on what the bullet's doing between 0 and 300. Meaning, if I need to shoot a guy at 25 yards, it's point of aim, point of impact. If I need to shoot him at 200 yards, it's point of aim, point of impact. If I need to shoot him at 300 yards, it's point of aim, point of impact. So I'm covered in, everywhere from 0 to 300. If we go down the rabbit hole of the different variations, there are ways to optimize and get a refined picture of what that's going to be. Realistically, unless you live in rural America, you're going to use a 5200 or 36, which I recommend as a baseline. In combat, I use 5200s. I've often used, but because of the deficiencies of zeroing ranges, I use 25-300 because I can see what I'm shooting at 25, get a real tight zero at 25. And then if I even wanted to skew that for a 5200, I'd aim about 1.5 inches below that, which represents a 5200. So, there's multiple ways to look at it, but you can't go wrong with either of the three.
Guitar Man Pete out there says he's using a PCC for home defense now, and he doesn't expect to ever have to shoot over 30 yards for anything on that red dot. What range would you use? If you're talking about a 30 yard, would that probably be the 25 yard zero for a PCC? I mean, what would, for someone who's not going to be looking outside of the home, I guess, or,
Yeah. One of the variables we often forget is you have to shoot something that you could see what the optic you're shooting at to get a good zero in the first place. So if you for example, if you say you're going to do a 100-yard zero with a 5.56 gun, well, if you have an 8-point dot, most people don't understand this, but the red dot on most magnification or most 8-point optics are about a 3.5 MOA dot, which means that 100 yards, it represents 3.5 inches, which means there's variation in the dot in itself. So if you're shooting 3.5 inches at 100 yards, you could be shooting on the edge of 3.5 inches, which gives you a 7-inch spread, which means your accuracy is all shot to shit. So you would dim down your aim point dot. You would shoot at 25 yards on an aim small, miss small, 1-inch pasty. And then, that's why I recommend reticles in the first place, because you can get a smaller sight picture to aim small, miss small. Most mil dot reticles are below 0.2 mils, which means they're smaller than a couple MOA or a couple inches. So you could take that pasty at 25 yards and quarter it. You could literally cut it in half and put your 5 rounds right in the middle, which is going to give you the confidence that you're able to shoot. So 25 yards, that's why the Army does it. That's why the military does it, because most Army military ranges are 25 yards. And most of the optics, which include the M68 aim point or CCO, don't have that ability to reach out with magnification. So yes, that is definitely a good tactic in using a 25-yard zero for that practice, or even for a 5200, or even for a 36 yard. Find out what your 25-yard hold off is going to be to represent 36 yards, which I imagine at 36 yards is just a little bit below, maybe an inch below that 25 yard.
Yeah, it's interesting. I did a video, I don't know, a couple weeks ago about holds, and there's people may not understand, I've zeroed my weapon. Well, if you zero it at 25-300, if it's not at 25 or at 300, it's not going to be, point of aim is not point of impact. So if you're shooting at a 25-yard zero, but you got that 21-foot home defense, that 7-yard home defense, you better know that you're going to have to aim probably about 3 or 4 inches high, because it's going to still be flat, but people don't understand holds. And I'm glad that you talked about that as well, because that is something, especially to the newer firearm owners that are in their community now over the last few months. They go buy their AR, they go buy their aim point or Trigicon, but they don't understand how to use it. So that's a great point. You're talking about the holdovers and everything else. There was a question up here from Jake Boy Cool. What about a pistol with a thumb safety like the SIG M18? Carrying one in the chamber with safety, viable option for the beginner. I'll let you go first.
Yeah, look, I was in the military when we used Beretta M9s with a safety a leverage safety with also a single action and double action pistol, and which was apparently flawed. I mean, the locking blocks on M9 Berettas are, as a special forces weapons guy, even as an infantry guy that used a pistol, those pistols are inherently flawed because they're made for law enforcement. They're made for long trigger pulls, which means safety. And so all those mechanisms on pistols that we use come from the law enforcement side of limiting liability. So I'm not worried about a 3 process or step draw stroke with a pistol because I'm dropping a hood, I'm unlocking a system, and then I'm going through something. I'm worried about me pulling that pistol efficiently and effectively and taking that shot. Again, grip safeties, lever safeties, even on 1911s, we kept them down and we rubber banded or used a tubular bungee around our grip safeties. Because under stress, remember all these technical skills that you practice on a range, one, they're never vetted unless you practice them under stress, which physical and physiological, which includes mental stress, is the way you get there. But you have to remember you're doing these things under stress. And you take a pistol and you go to grip it. I learned this hard lesson in IDPA and IPSC where I kept biffing the grip safety on my 1911. And then I don't feel confident in being able to use this. Well, the more things you have in the way of you pulling the trigger, the more or the less confident that you'll be. So again, I recommend a center strike single action pistol that doesn't have any safety mechanisms. That's why I'm a big advocate for Glock, because I use Glocks in contracting. I use it in the military, and I've never seen them fail. I was an 18 Bravo, a special forces weapons sergeant, a specialist who's worked on guns. I've never seen one of them fail. Yeah.
I understand the hatred towards the M9. I have an affinity for the M9 because I was never around guns before I joined the Marine Corps. So aside from maybe pulling a 22 at a snake or something, my buddy's ranch in Texas growing up or whatever, but shooting the M16A2 and shooting the M9 were my first experience. And I remember loving those experiences. So to this very day, I have that affection for the M9 or the 92, whatever, just because it was like the first handgun. That's when I learned. I was like, oh, God, people say, why do you like 9mm so much? I don't know why I like 9mm. That's what I know. That's what I used. And that's what I know how it's going to react. I know what the ballistics are. I know what's going to do with 115, 124, 147 grain. I know what that round is going to do. I know what those weapons are going to do, those weapon systems. So they were not the greatest, obviously, but I will always have an affection for them just because it was like the first handgun I ever bought. We're going to get into that here in a few minutes. I got some little fun questions to ask here in a few minutes and kind of see here. Clover, you got a question in there from Sean, it looks like.
Yeah, since we're on the pistol stuff.
Yeah. Sean White says, for pistol, do you... Okay, so I'm assuming he's saying like an RMR or something, but do you do a 10-yard or 25-yard zero when using a red dot on a pistol? Do you run a dot on a pistol ever?
So I do run dots on pistols, but I'm waiting for there to be better options. Look, I will tell you, it's been proven. If you're somebody who's new to owning guns and you want to get quick confidence on a pistol and your confidence in your abilities to potentially defend your life, right? Because, one, working with firearms is always a learning process. I learn every time I teach, every time I shoot. And I've been doing this for decades. And so even as an expert, I think in instruction, I am always constantly learning and improving the end product. So when you take a red dot and you put it on a gun and you hand it to somebody with zero experience, they're going to be able to hit the target. The reason is because it's a simple concept using eye-hand coordination of overlaying something with their eyes and then squeezing something with their hands. And so it's natural for us. It's very primitive. So one, I always recommend people who are getting into it to do that. I have built a lot of behavioral script and habit off of iron sights, which has made it more difficult for me to attain, one, the sight picture and sight box of the RMR or whatever the red dot optic option is. and acquisition. So I have to practice the visual acuity that it takes to see what I see. With that being said, it truly depends. I mean, there's a few variables there. One, the average gunfight takes place within about 13 feet. It's 12 point something. And that's an old FBI statistic. I think it was 2003 to 2013, based on shootings that police officers were in. But you could take that and look at 12 feet or 10 feet and realize that the deviation between 10 and 25 is inches, right?
Yeah.
So if you set yourself up for success, it's somewhere in between. I would do, honestly, a 10-yard zero, or the highest statistical probability of getting in a gunfight, which is about 12 feet. Zero it there, and it will cover you down for 25 feet. Now, maybe you'll have a minimal hold, but again, you are looking at a red dot that has a 3.5-inch MOA. So if that's the case at 25 yards, you're looking at a quarter of whatever that is. There's going to be minor deviations. It's going to get you ballpark. Ballpark for me is within the A zone. So as long as you're in that A box and you understand that hold based on distance, you'll be set up for success.
And I think a lot of it comes down also is, especially for someone who's just kind of getting into it, if you're talking about self-defense, you don't have to get that dime, grouping. It's a silhouette. The A zone, whatever we call it in IDP, the zero down zone, the A zone, and but if you're hitting a silhouette from 25 feet, then yes, you can work on being very, very precise. But ultimately, if you're worried about that combat shoot, that shit is defend, that self-defense shoot, and you can put an entire mag consistently right here, you're good. It's going to end that threat. That's the whole thing. So I find it funny, a lot of people that are just trying to be precision pistol shooters, and I'm like, unless you're doing competition, bro, it's get the shit out and point and shoot. Half the time, honest to God, I don't know about you, I don't even aim half the time. It's point and shoot. I know that my muscle memory and my mechanics are good, that I can go right here and not even to focus on that front sight, and I'm going to end that threat. I'm going to put it down there. And Clover and I were talking about that a couple weeks ago about point and shoot, and how many people say that's bad. Well, in a shit hits the fan scenario, you should be able, if you've done your work, you've done your practice, you should be able to draw, present, pull that trigger, and without even having to focus on that front sight and get that A zone, get that silhouette to end that threat. So, that's just one of those things where, I agree. G23 says, Mike, are you cross-eyed dominant, and do you practice non-dominant hand?
Yes, I am cross-eyed dominant. I'm right-handed and left-eye dominant.
Same here.
This is one of the most often asked questions when I talk about this. And a lot of people don't understand, one, that dominance has nothing to do with acuity, meaning the scale in which your eye is measured, meaning your dominant eye doesn't have to be your best eye. In fact, my left eye is 20/40. My right eye is 20/20. So I have astigmatism in my left eye, but it happens to be my dominant eye. And with pistol, since you shoot isosceles, it doesn't have a big determining factor of your accuracy or speed. If you just simply take the pistol and rotate it over that eye and push the pistol over that eye, you'll be set up. The mistake you'd be making is if you push it over your right eye and then tilt your head to look down your front sights. Like you said, one, I love the discussion about finding your front sights in a self-defense scenario. The answer is you'll never be able to find your front sights in a circumstance in which you pull your gun in defense of your life, especially against an immediate threat. I know this because I've killed people in combat, and I know under my own pretenses in being trained, thoroughly trained, and then reacting to an immediate threat, which is a person who has a barrel of a gun pointed at you, you have no time. The reaction time of a human being is about 0.2 of a second. Most people don't realize that the reaction time or the action time of you transitioning your field of view from target to front sight, which is from far to near, is 0.3 of a second. At best case scenario, it's actually a case study conducted by scientists who are looking at performance athletes and their ability to transfer their focus from far to near. 0.3. That's the best genetically enhanced human beings on the planet. So you take age, you take all these individual factors, and the reality is when you pull your gun to save your life, you'll never find the front sights. And in the duration, look, I don't teach people to just point shoot targets. I teach people that they have to be prepared for the immediate action or threat. and addressing an immediate action or threat by understanding they won't find the front sight, but they could evolve their eyes to the gunfight. So if it's 0.3 of a second, that's about 3 rounds in the gunfight. So to not transfer their eyes from target, which, by the way, the reason you're identifying a threat in the first place is because you have target focus, right? So you can't identify the world around you if you're focused on your front sight in the first place.
If anything back there's blurry.
Yeah, blurry, right? Because it's not, things aren't staged in gauntlets of steel and paper. We live in a world in which we identify, because we're sight hunters, we identify threats, and then we reduce that threat by driving that gun and then driving point alignment. I interviewed Dan Horner, who's the world's best shooter. There's no argument. Dan Horner taught me when he was a member of AMU. I actually had my Special Forces team to his place to do pistol, carbine, and rifle. And last year, he won every competition he shot as a USPSA world champion, as an NRA world champion, going against the best shooters in the world. And I asked him, I said, Dan, out of all the targets you shot in paper and steel, out of every comp that you won, which you won every one, how many times did you transition your field of view, meaning from target focus to front sight focus? And he said once. And I said, when was that circumstance? 27 yards, he had a 6-inch pie plate, and he transitioned his field of view, which inherently that's important. And then I asked him probably the most important tactical training tip I could give you. How do you become better at that? And what would you do if you had to train up for a competition? He said, I would sit out an IPSC target, which is the size of a man, at 20 yards. I would set a table, and I would stack 1,000 rounds. And then I would put my gun away in a holster, and I would drive my holster, or from my holster, drive my gun and shoot 5-round strings as fast as I could and as accurately as I could on that target without using my front sight. Meaning target picture, look, it's called alignment. It's not called point shooting the way we teach it, because you see in the background of your vision your front and rear sight. And if you do that enough, you understand the relationship between the target, your eyes, and the gun, and where that gun is. And so when I shoot a string of fire, I make our students shoot a string of fire and teach them a tactic, and they drive the gun as fast as they can. And at the end of it, I say, how many of you use your front sights? The answer is 0. And then the solution I give is because you want to live. If you want to live, you won't even think about transitioning your sights, which is counterintuitive to what I know. I was trying to Trey to drive from my holster in a 3-step process, 1, 2, and rail the gun and find my front sights in the rail. But that's inefficient, and that's slow, and you don't have any time. 0.2 of a second is no time at all.
Exactly. Let's see here. We got another question out there. Going back to dots a little bit. Do you like a larger dot? Both of his dots are 2 MOA, but do you like a larger since it's easier to pick up, or do you want like smaller dots in general?
Yeah,
I'm assuming we're talking carbines at this point.
Yeah, for carbines, I like a smaller dot. And even if I have a 3.5 MOA dot, I'm dialing it down to the point in which my eye can see it, but interrupting my field of view. Now, remember, the benefit that people don't realize, which is the whole concept behind what we're talking about in point shooting, the benefit for a red dot is you're not focused on a red dot. Your eyeball doesn't look at the red. You shouldn't be looking at a red dot and getting a refined dot picture with your eye, right? The benefit behind a red dot is your eyeball recognizes in the background of your vision what that is. And so it overlays the dot on target focus, which makes the shot sequence or process faster. So the size of the dot doesn't need to be big and doesn't need to be bright, because it will interrupt your target field of view. I'm focused on a threat. I drive the red dot. It's in the background of my vision, but I know it's overlaid, and I break the shot. So smaller and more refined is critical in accuracy, but also in not interrupting that acuity process between target and then red dot focus.
Exactly. Clover, you got anything you want to ask or anything right now?
Yeah, I was trying to get through some of the pistol questions out there, because I kind of want to back up and catch something else. We were in the side chat over there, and it was a conversation, mil radian, MOA. And Mike, you said earlier that you prefer mil radian, correct?
Absolutely, yeah.
Now, MOA, there's a lot of people out there that would disagree. I don't. I fall into the mil radian camp as well. Do you have a reason?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and that's a really good technical question. Here's what most people don't understand. Well, let me give context. One, I was a Special Forces sniper. Not only was I a sniper in special operations that was sniper qualified, but my job was actually a sniper, which is rare in the special operations period, because you can go to sniper school, you can go to SOTIC, which is special operations target interdiction course, but you could not be a sniper or rated sniper. To be a rated sniper, you have to be a member of the Commanders and Extremist Force, and you have to be slotted in that position. And so not only was I a sniper, I was a sniper team sergeant. And then, I shot the USASOC sniper comp, which included the best snipers in the world, and was very tied into the sniper community. One of the guys that just hired ran our sniper school, which teaches CAG snipers, Ranger snipers, and SF snipers. And so this information is not coming from a point of emotion, right? Because a lot of people who talk about guns do so because they have a legacy technical means of doing things. They know MOAs, they're comfortable with MOA, so they defer to MOA and say everything mil radian is doesn't matter. Here's the problem. MOA is minute of angle, which is an angular unit of measure, which gets larger and broader with distance away from the barrel. This is external ballistics based off of the trajectory of the round. The inherent problem with MOA is beyond 500 yards, you start to lose the math. So if you look at an MOA reticle, right, the BDC drops at MOA. So if I take an MOA reticle, for example, on a Leupold Mark III Alpha, which is what I used early on as a sniper, on a Remington 700 chassis or platform known as the M24. If I take that and I go to dial out for 700 yards, which is when around the 308 round is becoming transonic, right? It's about to become unstable or unpredictable. So if I go to dial at 700 yards, you would think, based off of normal logic, that I would dial down or dial up, in this case, 7 minutes of angle. But that's not how it works. So it doesn't correlate to distance. Most people think it does. Most people, even in special operations, used to think, oh, you dial 7 minutes and that equals to 700 meters. Well, that's not even close to the truth. You'll be at, I don't know the math off the top of my head, but it's like 7 plus 13 is the calculus. Well, the reason we got away from one MOA is because in between minutes of angle, how you measure it in your reticle, you have quarter MOA adjustments, right? Which are ways in which you hold over. The problem there is when you get beyond 500 yards, you don't have enough stage reticles or enough MOA built into the gun, right? We often refer to this as MOA that will seek into the rail, or MOA will seek into the reticle. So when we look at long distance, like 308 is capable of engaging targets at 1,000 yards. Yes, it's the hit probability degrades. The hit probability for 6.5 Creedmoor, for example, is double the hit probability for 308 at 1,000 meters. It's been tested by SOCOM. Brian Litz, the big brain on ballistics, has tested it. So when I'm looking at further distance shots, I need a reticle that has more minutia. Mil radians has that because the unit of measure is 0.2, meaning I have a stage line every 0.2 mils, when otherwise I would have had one every quarter of an MOA. So when I start to shoot at long distance ranges, I have the ability to reference a reticle staged line, right? Which means I have something tangible to look at to hold over, as opposed to an MOA where I have to dial it. Well, most people who don't understand this don't realize that in rapid engagement scenarios, which most snipers will be trained for, you don't have the ability to dial your elevation nor your windage. 5 years ago, the Marines and the Navy were dialing windage still, which is an environmental factor that consistently changes. So we picked up mil radian reticles where we could adjust on the fly. So now if I have a guy at 700 yards running towards me, I don't have to dial in MOA because I don't have the ability to reference it. I can hold the mil radian, shoot him, and then compensate the distance because he just advanced 100 yards in that time of flight and that time it took me to chamber another round. So
or pick up the next target immediately afterwards.
Exactly. Because I don't have time to adjust for wind, and I don't have time to adjust for things that are happening radically on the battlefield. If I send a 308 round at 1,000 yards and it has a 50% hit ratio less than a 6.5 Creedmoor, I'm going to miss And so the question is, what do I do when I miss? Not how do I compensate for the win at 1,000 yards? Because I'm more likely going to miss. The solution is now I have a mil radian line to reference where I could read the miss in a staged line and then reference that to adjust for that. And a lot of people don't realize that MOAs, one, it's an old unit of measure. Two, mil radian is used in FDC in firing mortars and field artillery and all kinds of weapon systems. And it's also the most refined unit of measure in understanding lat long and the environment around us. It is what we should be paying attention to. And MOA is old technology.
Absolutely. Clove, you have anything you want to follow up with that?
I think that covered it.
I think so.
I like it.
We got one out here from Guitar Man Pieces. I gotta know what's the deal with all the special forces guys and their tattoos. So, you want to bring that up?
I got a theory. So here's my theory. My theory is the military is what affects popular culture every time we go to war, and since the beginning of time. World War II soldiers, sailors, Marines, and aviators were coming back. You know what they were doing? They were getting Sailor Jerry tattoos. They were cutting P-52s into hot rods. They were taking motorcycles and putting apes on them and chopping them. And then what did that translate to? It translated to popular culture and people doing that. So when somebody asks me, hey, Mike, why do you have all those? Why does every SF guy have tattoo? I would say, why does every civilian have tattoos? You know why? More than likely it's because somewhere along the way in the GWAT, in Vietnam, we affected the culture. And so military guys coming out of the military, we've done that because it's part of our culture. But now you see a dude with a beard with tattoos who's a hipster and he thinks he's a special operations guy. Then the question should be, well, why do you have tattoos when you've never done anything in your life and you're doing it for the aesthetic? So that's just my idea on it. But not every guy has tattoos. In fact, a big mistake I made in special operations that debilitated my ability to do a lot of low vis operations was I had too many tattoos. Guys who have tattoos on their hands, their neck, I have no problem with that. But again, you want to mitigate your capability and abilities to do some cool stuff, get a lot of tattoos.
Yep. I remember when I got out of one of my schools, went to boot camp, went to combat, and then went to some schooling for our MOSs. And when I got out of my first school, it was like the rite of passage. Like the older guy, they just took you to the tattoo parlor and said, pick one. And it has to be, an Eagle Globe and Anchor or the Bulldog or Semper Fi. It's got to be. And the guys down, the tattoo guys, all they do is tattoo Marines at the time. So they know exactly what's going to happen. But it was kind of like a rite of passage. Like you're not involved and you're not included in the club until you go get inked with something that says Marines on there. And so that was just kind of one of those things where I didn't know anyone that didn't. I mean, honestly, I'm sure there were, but if they didn't, I didn't know it. I just assumed that everyone had some kind of ink on them. A lot of people did it for not just the military side; they did it for religious, or they did it. We had one of our guys was named Momo Wongwui Samoan, and Wongwui was 6'1", 225, and was literally the runt of the family. And he had Samoan tats that were symbolic to his culture and all of that. So, it's just one of those things. I think that more importantly, I think that even long before tattoos were accepted in society, like you said, back into World War II, and Clover was going to bring up something I'll let him bring up here in a second. It's been going on way before that. It was just, but it wasn't accepted into normal everyday society, and now it is, and it's one of those things. But Clover, you were making a point in the side chat. You want to bring that up as well?
Yeah, I mean, as far as military goes, and I'm just going to use not necessarily tattoos, but bodily markings. I mean, you go back to ancient times, whether it's Egyptians or Native Americans or the Mayans or whatever it would be. I mean, they were tatted up or marked up. A lot of their warriors and stuff. It was just I guess the culture.
It was war paint. Maybe it was war paint.
Yeah, war paint. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
That's what it was. G23 says, kind of go back to your sniper thing. And I know we're almost done with you. I know you've been hanging out for us for a while, but do you prefer on long range, you prefer 50 BMG, 416, or the 338 Lapua?
So, it's a good question. I will tell you that the 50 BMG was and never considered an anti-personnel round. It's been used that way, but it's essentially an indirect firing capability, meaning you can't be grossly accurate with that because the range and tolerances that you'll see. You want to shoot a bad guy at 2,000 yards. Good luck with that with a BMG on an M2 or any type of platform. I think that 338 Lapua or 300 Norma, even 300 Win Mag are appropriate measures for long range shooting. I mean, the 338 Lapua I've used, 300 Win Mag I've used, 300 Norma is coming. So as long as it has great external ballistics and you can tie that into terminal ballistics with a proper round and it's accurate, I'm all about either of those. And obviously having an optic to be able to PID and to manage what you're shooting at that far range. But I'm all about either one of those.
All right, so we got about 4 minutes left. This is kind of where we go with to rapid fire, have some fun questions, if you don't mind. So let's go with this. First gun that you actually bought yourself.
First gun I ever bought was when I was 12 years old. I owned that when I was 12 years old. SKS. But let's go. The first gun I ever owned was a Glock 17.
Okay. If you, barring NFA, nothing, no restrictions, barring no money and all that, what is your dream gun? What's the one gun you could have?
An STG 44 or a PSH 41, two iconic war guns.
Right on. Trying to think. What are some of the other questions we always ask, Clover? Okay, let's go with this. For long range, what's your favorite long range rifle platform to shoot? Do you have one?
6.5 Creedmoor, and then that could be in a JP, that could be in a Beret, that could be in a LaRue. My gas gun, my LaRue Tactical OBR Predator is my favorite gas gun, and that I want to get that chambered in 6.5. It's chambered in 308, but that's my favorite gun.
Okay, this is a great one. Just to throw it out there, Acor Armor out there says, what would you consider a minimal set of firearms for basic preparedness, knowing that with time it could grow, but your basic, is there a 2 or 3 gun set that you say you got to have this for basic preparedness?
I'm very specific about this. I would say Glock 17 9mm full size, a Glock 19 for everyday carry. For your truck gun, I would look at a 10-inch Tri-Arc Systems, a 10.3 BCM. If I'm extending my range, I'm partial to the 11.5 because an 11.5 is has been fielded by SOCOM, and they found the same tolerances that you would seek in a 14.5. So you just save a few inches. So I'd go with an 11.5 BCM with a 1-6 or 1-8 Night Force or Vortex.
Nice. Now Jamie out there, he's a Marine. He was a Force guy. I was with Strig. He wants to know what you think about Force guys.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of the Marine Corps. September 18th, I'm speaking at the Marine Corps' Force Recon Basic Recon School graduation.
Nice.
I grew up in the military, whether it was downrange or just operating with Marines all over the world. So I have a special place in my heart for Marines ever since I saw a couple Clint Eastwood Marine Corps style movies.
I understand. Yeah. All right. So this is one that's out there. Is a hot dog a sandwich?
A hot dog's a hot dog. A sandwich, 2 pieces of bread. If you got a bun, it's a different circumstance, different nomenclature.
That's right. What about Slim Jims? Are they candy?
No, never. Slim Jim.
Right. So we've got a chef out there, and he loves these things. He's fascinated with hot dogs being sandwiches and Slim Jims being candy because they're in the candy aisle. So Clover, do you have any little rapid fire questions you want to ask before we get out of here?
I'm brain dead, man. So no, not really.
Okay. 223 out there. One more question for you. 223 out there says, have you ever run the 408 Shy Tack?
I have not. Now I've heard people, they have told us about it, and I've heard a couple guys, buddies of ours who have run it, but maybe we'll do that as a review on our YouTube channel. I think that's something to do. Yeah,
I've got a good buddy of ours, Clover and I both know him. Charlie, I don't know if you've heard of Charlie Mike Precision is his company, but he was a SEALs sniper, and he shot 5,000 or 6,000 yards a couple years ago, and he was using the 408 Tejas, which was basically a wildcat off the Shy Tack, and it's pretty incredible. But yeah. All right, so once again, guys, thanks for watching. Mike, thank you so much for coming on. I want to give you a few minutes if you want to plug. I'll be throwing out your links to YouTube, Instagram, and all that. Tell people about maybe some of the projects you're working on, where they can find you, and anything that you want to plug right now.
Yeah, we do training, we do equipment, we do pretty much everything you could think of under the survival genre. You guys, you're listening to this, so you're probably interested in video content. We have a YouTube channel called the Fieldcraft Survival Channel. We also do audio podcast. We have the Fieldcraft Survival Podcast. Tomorrow, I have the dog handler and the dog Cairo that was on the Bin Laden raid coming to my studio. That's going to be a good one. I also have the Mike Force podcast, which is my personal podcast, and we do have a mindset podcast called Modern Mindset 365 or MM365. I just recommend everybody go to fieldcraftsurvival.com. I got a social media handle. It's mike.a.glover. If you're interested in anything that we're doing, most of it can be found on fieldcraftsurvival.com. But we're training all over the U.S. We think it's super important. We're doing survival. We're doing med. We're doing tactics. And we're all about supporting law enforcement in our community. So I just appreciate having me on. And, I look forward to being on next time. And thank you.
Yeah, man, it was awesome having you on. And like I said, if you guys haven't checked out Mike or any of the channels, go check it out. Like I said, I found you through a podcast, and I think you were maybe it was with one with Sean or Rob. I can't remember which one. I was like, oh, this guy, like, I like zero, like, that's bullshit. And you're calling a spade, and you don't hear that too often. So many people are too political. And I was like, oh, I like this. And that was a while ago. And I started watching your stuff. And I was like, oh, I got to get this guy on. And it was wonderful. And like I said, thanks for coming on. I love the way that you speak your mind, and you hold everything that you have to you is you, and there's no fake about it. So I love that. Thank you for everything that you're doing out there. If you want to go out there and check them out, I'll put the links out there, fieldcraftsurvival.com. You've got YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, whatever. Go check him out. If you want training, he does training. He's got gear. Everything is there. Great podcast. There's multiple podcasts that he's involved with. They're all good listens. So go check them out. They're all over their channel and all that, but it's wonderful. If you're out there, thank you for being live. Thanks for all the questions. Wonderful to have you guys. The chat was great. If you're watching a replay or listening in podcast form on iHeart or Spotify or whatever, leave comments or questions in the comment section, and we'll make sure we get them to Mike, and maybe he can answer them and all that. But utilize the comment section down below if you have questions. Thank you guys for always watching. Stay safe out there, and we'll see you soon. Semper Fi.